Hello, my name is Luis Cabrera. I am a principal program manager. I am responsible for cognitive search, which is a new capability of Azure Search. Welcome to the second part of our webinar on knowledge mining and cognitive search. We are very excited to be with you.
And I'm Rodrigo Souza, Senior Data Scientist with the Learn AI team.
So Rodrigo and I yesterday told you a little bit about cognitive search. Today we're going to get a little bit more technical. We have pre-recorded some of these videos. That means that we can answer some of your questions while you are seeing us actually explaining some of the concepts. So it's like being in two places at the same time. And today we'll be talking about how you can create or define a data source programmatically, how you can define a skill set or an enrichment pipeline programmatically, and then how do you define the index as well. So that will be actually the first video. So we'll start with that. Let's take it away. Before we can use cognitive search programmatically, there are a few prerequisites that you need to follow. First of all, you need to have some data in Azure Blob Storage. We have done this in a previous video, so you may want to take a look at that if you don't have that already. There are some resources that you can download as well. The URL is on the screen. And these resources will have the content of the REST API calls that we will be making, so that you don't have to type all that text from scratch. And last but not least, if you have not already installed Postman or a tool like Fiddler in order to make the REST API calls, you may want to do that as well. Azure Search has different objects that you need to be aware of. We will be explaining each of these separately, and then we will show you how to create each of these programmatically. So first of all, we have a data source. The data source has all the information about about where your data resides and how you want to ingest that data. Then we have a skill set. This is the entity that has all the information about how to enrich your data. We have an index, which is where or the format of the different fields in your searchable index and the characteristics on how you may query that information. And then we have this indexer, which is aware of each of these entities, connects them all together, and is the one that knows when to go to the index to get any file changes, enrich them, and then feed them right into the index. So we'll go through each of them one by one. As I mentioned, the first one of these is the data source. So we will be creating a data source. More specifically, we will be focused on creating a data source that connects to a blob storage container. And Rodrigo will show us how to do that programmatically.
Okay, let's go. Here in the Postman workspace, we have our create data source method. So you have access to these resources in the link Luis just shared with you. And you don't need to type the body of the data source we are using. What you need to do, of course, is to copy the connection string from your storage account in the Azure portal. Also, you need to customize to use the name of the container you created, again, in the Azure portal. You need to paste here. You can name your data source as you want, but we will be using this information in the next steps.
So Rodrigo, where do I get this connection string? Like, let's say I have created my blob storage account. Where can I get this information? Sometimes it's not always trivial.
Yeah, so here in the Azure portal, we have our Azure Search service. And in the same resource group, we created the storage account. And in this storage account, you see the Access Keys tab. In this tab, you have two very important, very useful information. the key to access the files directly, or the connection string. That's exactly what we'll be using.
So you just copied this.
You just need to copy, you click this blue button here, and it's copied to your clipboard.
Perfect.
And then you paste here.
Okay.
Right? And it's important to define the type of this data source. In our case, it's an Azure blob. Well, what are the possible types? So you need to refer the API documentation to make sure to use the right type name. In the headers, here we are specifying this JSON communication, the requests and the outputs, and we need to copy and paste from the Azure Search portal the key to access the service. It's also interesting to notice this URL here, the formation of the request. It's a post, it's a type of post, and it has the name of the service we created before, and you don't need to mention in the URL the name of the object we are creating. In this case, it's a data source. You see it is a little bit different for the next APIs you'll be working with.
I think whenever you use post, you can actually specify the name as part of the body.
Yeah, so you'll see the difference in the next steps of our lab. So here, when we submit, we have this message saying the data source was created, and I name it new data source.
So it was successful.
Successful.
Very good. So that means we can go to our next step. So for the next step, we are actually going to create a skill set. And the skill set, if you remember, is really about how do we define each of the different enrichment steps that we call, and how do we connect them together. So for instance, I have an example here of a potential skill set. You can see a lot of connections, inputs of some skills going into, or rather outputs of some skills going as inputs into other skills. So we need to be able to define this information, and we'll explain how to do that programmatically through a skill set. I should point out that as we come out of the document cracking stage, we have a set of properties related to a particular document. So I have a tree representation here in this slide for you. So essentially we have a document has content, it has a set of normalized images, and I can reference to each of these as part of a tree. That's how we can think about it. So as we define the skill set, or this array of skills, as we specify the inputs into this, we can actually refer to parts of this tree that we're creating. So we have this tree. Rodrigo will actually do it in Postman in a second, but I just want to kind of explain the different parts of the skill set. So you can make either a put or a post call. If you do a post call, you can actually specify the name of the skill set as part of the call. In this case, I'm just gonna pass the name as part of the call itself and not as a part of the body. So I'll use the put call, and then you will notice that the skill set is really an array of strings. So I'm gonna go and explain how you specify each of the skills. So each of them has a type. In this specific example, I decided to detect the language, let's say. So you will also notice in the documentation for each of the built-in skills what is the name that you should use here for the type of skill. So here is Microsoft.skills.text.language detection skill. Then I specify the inputs. In the case of the inputs here, it takes one input, which is the text that I want to analyze. And I am telling it, okay, so the input of that, take it from the content of the document, or document/content, as you can see here. So it's going to take the content, which we extracted as part of the document cracking stage, and then it's going to detect the language and then produce some outputs, which it produces two outputs, language code and language name in this case. And I have the opportunity if I wanted to change the name that I want to, or how I want to call these outputs as part of this kind of tree of information. So I decided to just change the name and call it my language code and my language name. So as I do that, we can think of it as the tree growing. Let's say if I were to focus on my language code, I have my tree of information, and then it has this new node called my language code, and it will also have my language name. So you can see how I am adding nodes to this enriched document as I go through each of these skills. Let's just do one more example, just to show that you can take the outputs of some skills and also feed them as input into other skills. So let's say I continue defining my skill set, and I add a second skill here. In this case, I am going to add the named entity recognition skill, and I'm going to pass as one of the inputs, as the language code parameter, the /document/my language code, which I just generated in the previous skill, right? So now I have two skills that are connected. And that's essentially how you kind of chain together different skills in order to generate any skill set that you want. In this specific case, you will notice that the output of this is called organizations, and I'm going to keep the same name. And now these organizations are actually an array of organizations. So sometimes, as this tree grows, it will actually have not only one element, but the cardinality changes. So I may have many organizations for a particular document. And the reason I picked this example is because sometimes we want to enrich, let's say, the document itself or the content of the document. In that case, the cardinality is 1. But sometimes we want to enrich really a different subtype here, like each of the organizations, right? And in that case, we may need to call an enrichment step, I don't know, 100 times, depending on the number of organizations found in a single document. So we need to be able to express to the system whether we want to do an enrichment on the list as a whole or on each of the elements within that list. So we have a way to do that, which is we introduce a new element as part of the skill definition that we call context, that tell us what type of input should be provided or where to apply this enrichment step. So in this case, we pass each of the organizations, in other words, document/organization/star. So it says, for each of the children of organizations, call this enrichment step. And in this case, is some kind of custom skill that, given an organization name, gets some ID. So it's some fictitious custom skill. But it shows that I can essentially generate an organization ID for each of the organizations. So generating essentially the graph that you see in the screen right now. So with that said, I think we have enough background to actually see how to create a skill set programmatically, and Rodrigo will show us that.
So we are back here to the Postman workspace, and now we'll create a skill set. We just learned what it is. The skills, you can create a skill set with a post or a put method. Here we are using a put. And again, I have the service, the Azure Search service name, and the URL is a little bit different. We are specifying its skill sets and the name of the skill set because it is a put. If you are using a post, you don't need to specify it here. The name will be in the body. In this body here, we will define which AI services, which AI skills we'll be using on our data set. And after a small description, the first one is the OCR. We want to run OCR on the normalized images, all of the normalized